Thank you for getting in touch. It was really nice to hear from you. I've been a fan of director's notes for so long. So yeah, it was really nice to get the email.
Good. Yeah. Well, welcome to Director's Notes.
That.
Because, yeah, so we're running a series of sort of industry insight interviews. And I
Mhm.
mean, you have one of the most incredible IMDb, repertoires. I was looking through it earlier and I was like, there's nothing she hasn't worked on.
I am trying my hardest. It's a
Well done.
complex industry to navigate, so you know.
I want to start by asking you, was there a particular instrument or something that you began playing that was then your catalyst into working as a composer?
That's a really good question. The first instrument I actually started playing was piano, and I really didn't like it.
Okay.
You know, when you're like extremely young and you're like, I want to, do a hobby and stuff, and it felt very like regimented to me. And I loved the instrument, I loved exploring it and sort of like playing around and messing around on it. But I really didn't like, I guess, I don't know, like sort of the structure that I was getting forced into. Um, but now, funnily enough, it's quite possibly my favorite instrument. Wish I'd stuck to the lessons because then I'd be a little better. But I think I my origin story really is I started songwriting, and I would say vocals probably really. It's kind of been the instrument that I've had a focus on throughout my entire career and has found itself into most of my soundtracks more than anything else, I'd say. And yeah, when I kind of discovered that and just discovered what you could do with the human voice, because I love doing extended techniques and avant-garde stuff. And when I realized there was so much that you could unpack and that every single voice is inherently unique, I just discovered this massive love for just music and composition. And there were kind of there's a lot of rules, but know the rules to break them. So there's almost like that joy of just like complete liberty. And yeah, I would say that's kind of where that was the catalyst for me really discovering music. And it's kind of compositionally where I started. I started writing lyrics and melodies and then started learning the guitar and a few other things so that I could support myself and terrifyingly do gigs and things. So yeah, I would say the voice, but my first instrument was the piano. It's funny how it works.
It is. And I think most people as well, pianos, it's quite a classic sort of starter instrument, is it?
Yeah, yeah.
I cannot play music to save my life. Um, Played the clarinet badly for about 2 years, and that was just so I
That's
didn't.
not an easy one.
It's not an easy one. I don't know why I
Well,
chose it. It's because I didn't want to go to maths lessons, and I learned that if you played an instrument, you could get out of lessons, and that is my musical history. Love listening to it, love what it brings to life. Can't play it.
I mean, music, if you go into the theory of it, there's maths involved. So you kind of shot yourself in the foot a little.
There we go. See, it's not for
Could have
me.
done
None of it's
volleyball
for
or
me.
something. But yeah, clarinet is complex just because piano you can kind of play the notes and they will make a sound, but there's certain instruments that take so long to just be able to get a sound out of it, and that's one of them.
Yeah, I don't know what I was thinking.
Your poor parents. And you're like,
Oh yeah, definitely. That was awful. Torture.
oh, I did the recorder for a while. That was traumatizing for my
Yeah.
parents, most definitely.
So
Oh.
then what about film? What was the first project you worked on? And yeah, how did that light a fire
Oh,
in you?
that's a good question. What
I
was
know
the
I like
first
to
project?
start a bit off kilter.
Yeah, I mean, so I the first things I scored really boringly were whilst I was studying at uni, my bachelor's. I was doing a music production course, and it kind of encompassed composition and the more technological side of things with recording. And the goal was to kind of become self-sufficient as a songwriter so that I could make demos, and work with other artists and things. And I tried all the songwriting modules and everything, And there was literally just a film one left, and I just thought, well, I'll try it. I could repeat something or I'll try something new. It's the first year. If I'm terrible at it, it doesn't count to my final grades. And it was just a light bulb moment. So there's not really like a film that I worked on. I ended up going to NFTS, and that's when I started getting my portfolio of work. I'm from Gibraltar originally, and there isn't really a film industry there. So there wasn't that much scope to be able to try things out. So at uni, backtracking, the first things I scored was actually sort of like pre-existing films.
Yeah.
A lot of horror as well. I just love exploring tone and timbre. So I just kind of thought this is something where you can really go wild and throw a lot of things at it and see what it likes. So I think that's where the passion started, because it was, again, it felt like there are rules. At that point, though, starting out, I had sort of no knowledge of the rules. I kind of started and then learned them later and kind of realized that I was doing a lot of them naturally. Um, but because of that, I was just so excited to see what would happen when you get music and put it onto visuals. Because for me, I'd only ever seen, at least with my own experience, the reverse, in which I'd write a song and then maybe there'd be some sort of video accompanying it, music video. And it was such a 180. And when I think about it, it's it's mind-boggling to me that it didn't come to me sooner, because my mother is a watercolor painter. She's incredible. Fine arts, visual arts had always been in my life. It's just like, where was the light bulb moment earlier? I just don't know. It literally had to be like, presented to me. But yeah, it just felt like everything that I'd sort of been brought up with just kind of, married together in the most perfect and logical way.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, it is weird, isn't it? How life takes us down different paths, and then suddenly you discover something, and it is that light bulb moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So when you're working on a film with directors,
Mhm.
when do you like to be brought in? At what point do you like to be involved? And at what point do you think you do your best work? And yeah, talk us through that process.
Yeah, I feel like it's different for every film. I would say I would like to be brought on at least somewhere midway through the edits. That's like kind of at least, but depending on the film, depending when I'm brought on, sometimes it's just really not the case. It's kind of a luxury to be able to sit with the film, see how the edit's progressing, because more often than not, sometimes the music, if it gets involved sooner and you have more flexibility with it than just placing temp, you can have a back and forth and interplay between the sonics and the edits, and you can discover some amazing things that you might not have done before, like if you hadn't done it that way. But I mean, I've gotten sent scripts a lot, and those are always really great to read. Sometimes I'll be brought on at that stage, and I love reading scripts. Sometimes I'm getting sent them because there's something musical that kind of needs to be considered before the actual shoot, but sometimes I just get sent those anyway to see if I'm interested in the project. And yeah, I'm kind of a fan of being brought on at any point. Ideally, it's before picture lock, but yeah, I'm kind of quite happy to go with the flow depending on the film and what makes most sense. It's kind of what I love. Every single film is different and requires something different.
Yeah.
So it's hard to entirely pinpoint, and that's what keeps it interesting and exciting. Um, but yeah, I love to be able to play around and see what the film is liking, what it doesn't like, um, before the lock, if
Mm.
possible. Mm.
And what's your process for that? So say, yeah, you're playing around with something and there are tones that change, how do you work to keep that variation, to keep it moving?
Yeah. What's my process? It's quite a vast question, really, isn't it?
Sorry, yeah, that covers a lot, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, depending on what I see of the film, or maybe even sometimes I just get a treatment and they're about to shoot. Sometimes I get quite a solid cut, or an assembly, or just a script. I think like the starting point for me is always really the conversation with the director,
Yeah.
and just the route they're looking to take, the headspace they're in with it. And those conversations for me are the ultimate source of inspiration because, yeah, it's just one of the reasons I love film so much is the collaborative aspect. And it's sort of that whole greater than the sum of its parts sort of thing. And so the conversations with the directors for me are what sparks it. And then from there, I will take what I know or have of the film. Sometimes I'll write not to picture as well. So those conversations are really, really crucial, especially if it's something that's needed for the shoot.
Yeah.
And then I'll just play around really. It's I know different composers have different sort of like favorite parts of the process, but for me, I just really love the exploration. So I just love to play around and try things out. I'm always looking for those happy accidents that kind of like open up an idea or spark something that really sort of allows the soundtrack to take life. I feel like half my career is just me taking credit for mistakes that I made. I was like, oh, that sounds great.
Monopolize on that. Why not?
Yeah, yeah, no, I love it because every day surprises me. And sometimes it's the instrument I'm working with, sometimes it's the collaborator, sometimes it's the film. I read the script and then it's shot and it's kind of like turned into something different. And sometimes you absolutely cannot predict what the film will need. And I mean, sometimes I've written something to script and then it ends up, or a variation of it ends up in the final thing, which is always fascinating to see. And sometimes I've written something and it's just like, yeah, this doesn't work. But the journey is so great. It's just, nature of the beast. But the journey is so great. And yeah, I feel like I'm constantly looking for those sources of inspiration. And the process always starts with the conversation, then me exploring. And then we kind of tend to sort of figure out a palette of instruments that works, maybe a few themes that make sense. Then I'll probably score a couple of scenes that are very informative for the film and kind of figure out how we want the music to interact with the narrative and the characters and the cut itself. And then from there, I tend to score the whole thing so we can see how it balances out. And then it's kind of working everything sort of simultaneously because it's great to hone into one cue, but the bigger picture is, literally the picture. It's everything. So balancing that out and making sure everything is working in isolation and together cohesively is kind of it. And then, yeah, that's it.
I mean, there's a lot of process.
Yeah.
And when you have those sort of all-important conversation with directors, what are you asking them? What do you want to find out about the film that allows you to go in and then make the music?
Yeah, I think more the question I always ask directors is, what do you want people to go away feeling once they've watched the film? And I feel like that is a very telling and fascinating insight into the intention of the film, really. And to me, that is ultimately what I'm trying to understand and figure out. And I think, because for me, where the music and the film really connect and all the collaborators and everything connect is just the emotion, the core emotion. So for me, it's all about sussing that out, getting the nuances of it, and then going from there. And I think that is kind of what I'm trying to always draw out of a director. And it can change. It fluctuates so often as well, depending on what, the shoot does, the cut does, even sometimes sound design can come in and it just completely sheds a new light on things. And it's like, wow, okay. But yeah, figuring that out also so that I know when we're starting out, we're on the same wavelength, we have the same goals, and we're just working towards achieving the same thing is really what I'm looking for.
Yeah. And I mean, you work with such a wide variety of directors, both in England, internationally. How is the working process? Is it online, over Zoom? Do you meet people?
Yeah, so actually it's been very interesting. When I can, I love to meet directors in person. I think there's no replacement for meeting someone in person. I mean, if the situation allows, if they're in the US, then it's, quite possibly impossible.
Yeah,
But and also the time difference really does not help.
of
That being said, if
course.
we were meeting in person, we'd be in the same time difference. But anyway, yeah. I ideally like to meet directors in person. What I found is pre-COVID, I pretty much always would at least once maybe meet a director in person. Post-COVID, it's gone very online, I've come to find.
Everything's changed.
Pros and cons to it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. A lot of remote working, which I think will open up the industry, especially for composers, a lot.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people that pretty much completely work remotely and aren't based in London, even when they're working with people that are. And it's exciting because it just makes me think, well, you could actually be situated in any part of the world, and it wouldn't limit you at all, which is great.
Yeah.
I would say like 80% of it is online at the moment. Zooms and emails,
Yeah.
sometimes calls, a bit vintage now. I don't actually even get calls that much anymore. Um, but yeah, it's a mix. I would like more in person. It's always nice when you have a director that comes in towards the end and you kind of fine tune things, and that can speed up the process a lot, because what can be, you know, sort of a back and forth on several emails, you can just kind of do in the blink of an eye in person. So I'm
Yeah.
always interested in doing collaborations as much as possible in person, but it just really does depend. Yeah.
No, I agree with you. Nothing beats in person. And that's why, as well, when
Mm,
you talk about film festivals, that's what's so great about them, because you meet all these people and you're like, yes, thank you. And
yeah,
I feel like you can't really understand a person until you met them. I'm a big believer of that.
absolutely, absolutely. I mean, do they say 80% of communication is nonverbal or something like that?
Yeah, that
Majority.
wouldn't surprise
So
me.
so much of it, I think, is so nuanced. And I mean, I just any excuse for a coffee, you know, filmmaker life, looking for that buzz. But yeah, it's interesting, and pros and cons. I think there's a lot of good within that. But yeah, I totally agree. There's nothing like meeting in person.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then what about connecting with people, as you said? And how do you decide on the right scripts for you?
Mm. Complex question. It's
A lot.
interesting because prior to going to NFTS, I had never really read a script before. And it's a muscle that I've had to exercise, and sort of a skill that I've had to develop, because I took the idea of it for granted before I did. And when I was at the very start of my career, I'd read a script and think, I'm struggling to understand the tone of this. I feel like sometimes maybe it's because the scripts back then were potentially not as good. I'm not sure. Like, because, I was starting out, so the projects I would get would, you know, be a lot of student films and things. And yeah, so, but I didn't have the confidence with it. And across my career, I've, grown to really love reading scripts. And when I'm brought on board a project, if they send me the treatment, I'm, always asking, are you happy to send me the script? I would love to read it, because I find it such a wonderfully informative part of the process for me. And it's on the complete other side of things. So I'm just always fascinated by everyone in film, all the collaborators, each one. It's one of the joys of filmmaking, I think. It takes a village, and every single person in it just has such an incredible craft that is so different to everyone else's. And I just feel like I'm constantly getting mind blown by everyone that I work with, and it's such a privilege, really. But how do I choose the script? It's a good question. I feel like there seems to be a sort of instinctual draw to certain stories. Oh my God, your dog.
Yeah, she always she likes to wake up when I'm doing an interview. She's like, "Hiya."
I mean, I have a cat somewhere. I'm very astonished that he hasn't shown up yet. He will. But yeah, I feel as though there's a bit of like an instinctual draw that I have to scripts that I feel will really work for me. I think they just, certain stories will speak to me. Sometimes the sort of cinematic language, like the script is written in such a visceral way that it just completely captivates me and I can feel it and I can see it. And that's really exciting. I'm always loving like a high concept film as well. I love sci-fi and horror and even just more like nuanced high concept films that is, maybe a very at its core a human story that then it expands into something whatever it may be. I think the best sci-fis for me personally are an example of that. They're set in this world, but at their core, it's a human story that you can't help but connect with. Um, but yeah, I think it's just been through developing the skill of reading scripts and just knowing what I like, having worked on a few different films now, and also I think I would say I really love films that you can tell from the start that the music is going to be a key sort of aspect of the cinematic language, whether that be in a bold way or in a nuanced way. Um, that's what really draws me to it. But every single script and every film, again, is so different. So it's really hard to quantify. Uh, yeah, I hope I've answered the question.
So you've mentioned sort of horror and sci-fi, and I mean, I totally agree with you. Music, the music in a script. I mean, it has such power.
Yeah.
Who are your inspirations? Who do you draw from in this world?
As in filmically or
Yeah,
generally?
musically, filmically, composers.
Yeah, I mean, I love Lynn Ramsey so much. I all her work has completely blown me away. Yorgos is great. I just love what he does. I think it's a perfect example of just how much music can connect and be part of the fabric of a film. Just the way he uses music is so incredible. And then, I mean, John Williams is a god. There's no question. So there's that. It's almost like, should I even bother mentioning him? It's so obvious. But I love Johnny Greenwood, Mika Levy, Danny Elfman as well. People that kind of come at songwriting and soundtrack writing and just music creation at an angle that feels a little different. And I can really sort of, I'm captivated by their voices and what they do. And it just feels like their work is just, it feels quite instinctual and it just feels like art to me. And they just inspire me so greatly.
So we've spoken about film, but you work over different mediums, right? So you do TV, you do
Yeah,
adverts. Does the way you work change depending on the medium?
a little bit. I would say probably more than anything, it's scheduling that changes just because each project, if it's commercials, they tend to be very quick turnaround. If it's TV, and there's more than one episode, there's a lot of things that need to balance out. If it's a short versus a feature, they're very different as well. There's obviously a lot that kind of overlaps, and the framework has a lot of similarities. But I would say that as a whole is probably what varies the most. I I find my inspiration by just exploring things and trying things out, even if it all gets scrapped and no one hears it but me. So I would say my process across all of them is quite similar.
Yeah.
Even if it's, something quite experimental or something that's more traditional, I find that I'm kind of throwing melodies at something. For example, if it's for violin and they want, traditionally played violin, not, sort of like extended techniques or anything. I just trying loads of different melodies, trying different amounts of space, and just really exploring what can be done within each project. So I would argue that it's all quite similar, really, the way that I approach it, because that is how I've learned to source my inspiration. It's an interesting industry because I'm fortunate enough to be doing this, day in and day out. And I think inspiration can be taken for granted a little bit. And I've kind of learned, okay, I have deadlines I need to hit. I need to write a certain amount of music today. Has to happen. How do you make it happen, I suppose? And I've kind of tapped into ways that I imagine it's kind of unique to every single composer, but I've tapped into ways that really inspire and spark that creativity for me. And it's kind of working in that way. Just playing around, finding the joy in it, which is, different for everything. So it always keeps it fresh. And whether that's an ad or it's a feature film, I kind of start with the same headspace.
And I was when I was looking earlier, how do you feel if you're brought into a project which already has temp music in place?
Mm-hmm.
How does that then change? Yeah. Oh, yeah. What do you think about that?
Temp love. You know what? It's always glorious if you've come on earlier and they can temp it with your own music. That's always
ideal.
Great. It is ideal, yeah. Like 80% of the time it's not the case. But I don't really have an issue with temp. I think when there's been temp in something for so long that everyone has grown to completely adore it, and you're fighting against that connection that they have. And more often than not, it's a track that everyone already knows. So it's almost impossible to emulate the exact connection because they already have a history with it in a way. That is, I think, when it's toughest. But I really like temp. I think it's really useful. I think it can speed up the process a lot. The time it takes to throw a few different tracks on there and see what works and what doesn't, and the time it takes for a composer to write all those tracks it can just really help to speed things up. Temp for me as well is always interesting because unless it just works absolutely perfectly, there's always usually something that isn't quite right. So for me, it's like, okay, this is telling me what does work, and it's also telling me what doesn't work. And to me, that can be really eye-opening and just so useful. So I like temp. She said with reservations. No, it's great. It's good. It's I think also just at the start of the edit, depending on schedules and stuff, it can be just really helpful to get the ball rolling. There's a power in temp for sure. I mean, there's been a few times where something's been temped with, like an 80-piece orchestra and just, the masters like Mozart and you're like, okay.
Yeah, that's big.
Let's go. Yeah. And well, it's one of those things where it's like, okay, cool. Let's do it. It's complex when the budget doesn't allow for an orchestra and things, and you're kind of sort of trying to navigate that. But again, it's fun, really, and it's a really useful tool. I think temp love is very dangerous, and we can all see it coming a mile away, and yet we can't help ourselves sometimes.
I like it.
Yeah.
So my final question for you, what's your favorite instrument at the moment that you're using and that you're incorporating into your work?
Ooh, let me think. Today, I literally got it beside me, actually. It's going to fall. Today, I've been using this. I wouldn't say it's my favorite instrument. It's called an anklung. It's incredible. It's like a... Isn't it amazing? It's... I found it on Facebook Marketplace, actually.
I love Marketplace.
Oh, you know what? I have a problem though, because I'm just constantly spying for instruments. Just because, as I say, I just love tone and timbre, and I'm just going to try and not break it as I put it down. I think I broke it. That's the end of that. So I'm just always really excited to get my hands on something new and try things out. That's so good for like folk horror because it's got this sort of wooden, analog sort of feel to it. But what is my favorite instrument at the moment? It's a good question. I think it's the flute.
Nice, right in front of you. I like it. It's like Blue Peter. Here's one I made earlier.
Yeah, well, it's funny because this instrument I bought this. Well, it's shamefully a really cheap flute, and I've gotten a lot of use out of it. But I just bought it because I wanted to try a new instrument ages ago. It was sat there for quite a while because I knew that this is a complex instrument and there's a technique that I need to learn. But every so often I'd be doing soundtracks and I was thinking, yeah, I need a solo part, and voice doesn't make sense. The instruments I can play don't make sense. What could I try? And so I kept picking up the flute every so often. And I've found so much joy in it. It has so much similarity in a way to singing for me, just a lot of the technique. And it's been really eye-opening. And my God, you put this through a guitar pedal and it sounds incredible. And then I've just tried stretching like the waveforms and everything. And there's so much that can be done. So for now, I would say it's that, just because I've ignited a passion in it. And I'm slowly getting passable at it. If I need to do like a solo part, I have to sort of like record like 10 different takes and sort of like piece it together, Frankenstein it a bit, but it's fine. But it works and I'm loving it. Yeah. So
it's
flute.
that exploring, isn't it? It's that learning as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, and I saw an artist live. I can't remember his name for the life of me, but he's a saxophonist, and I mean it basically it comes to mind because it has these sort of buttons. Wait, buttons. There's a technical term for this.
I mean,
I'm not formally trained in flute. I'm sorry, but yeah, and he had mics on the buttons of his sax, and he was playing, and then he was sort of looping the sounds of the buttons and creating this sort of incredible cyclical sound that just completely was astonishing. And I just kind of thought, whoa.
The possibility.
The possibilities are endless. So I've been trying things out for a soundtrack at the moment. And yeah, it's just so exciting. I just love using instruments in ways that you wouldn't expect. And, that someone might be like, oh, let's try and sort of reduce the sound of the buttons as much as possible to get the most pristine sound of the melody. To me, I'm like, actually, that's got a lot of character. What can we do with that? Yeah, and that just kind of it was incredible. I wish I could recall the artist's name, but yeah. Shout out to the artist.